So, welcome to the Park Board meeting of May 28th, 2019. This is considered a special meeting because yesterday was a holiday, but this is still just our May meeting. Before we get started, I want to do one introduction anyway. We have April Craig with us, which is our new alternate member. And Chris, as you now know, is a regular member.
Bump me up.
And Marlene, who's not with us yet, or at the moment, is our other alternate member who's joining us. So we're glad to have another full board here, starting another new term here tonight. So with that, everyone have an opportunity to review minutes from our last meeting. Any questions or comments or corrections? If not, would somebody like to make a motion to approve minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second that?
I'll second.
And everyone in favor of approving minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you for that. We do have a few members from the community here. Anybody like to make a comment? No? And Corey and Connie, would you like to do that now or a little bit later after presentations?
Reserved for later.
Reserved, okay. I guess we'll just jump right into it then with regular business of goals and policies from Jennifer. This is going to be an action item here tonight.
So hello everyone. As you may recall, last July, as we were adopting the Park Strategic Plan, we were asked by Council and Planning Policy Commission to go back and simplify and reorganize our goals and policies to provide some better clarity and organization for user friendliness and experience, and also to add in some stronger language in and around wayfinding and signage. Since that time, since the beginning of the year, we created an ad hoc committee. Thank you, Chris and Brad and Jonathan, for serving on that committee, working with Shantae and us and myself to go through and reorganize the goals and policies. For those, a short little recap for those of you who weren't here last month about the process that we went through. We went through a deductive process, looked at all the policies and goals, and really stripped away all prior headings and topics and really looked at the essence of what those goals were and put them into some policies and moved them into some new buckets, for lack of a better term. And then we worked within each bucket to further deduce and simplify language, did a little wordsmithing, got rid of duplication, and we met 5 times over a series of a few months. Every meeting was 2 hours. The committee did do homework, and last month we had presented the draft goals and policies. And here tonight, before we ask for recommendation on the goals and policies as put together by the ad hoc committee, we want to first just kind of walk you through what were some of the significant changes and highlight those for you. So Shantae is going to walk through a matrix that we'll be sending forward as we go through our next processes, because after recommendation from the Park Board, we'll be going back to the Planning Policy Commission in July and eventual council again for adoption. And these will replace the goals and policies that are currently in the Park Strategic Plan, and will update the Parks element of the comprehensive plan as well. So with that, Shantae, if you want a quick hit on which are our new goals and which policies changed, and let everyone know for their reference.
Yeah, so in your packet was included this matrix or spreadsheet that kind of outlines the changes that are made. So how it's organized is On the left column is the original goal or policy language, and then in the order of the original document. So each line, when we wanted, the numbers in front of each are just for tracking purposes, just so as we are making changes, we could track those changes through the revised document. So on the far left column, as I said, is original goal or policy language, and then items that are underlined is language that was removed. And in the middle column is the revised goal or policy, and then in red would be added language. And then in the far right column is a description of those changes. So I'm not going to go through each one, but you guys can certainly take the time to read it more thoroughly. But I can highlight the more significant, adds like added goals and policy. So there were 2 identified new goals. So I'll just kind of go through. So connectivity, you can see in red here, was an added goal. So connect parks, neighborhoods, business districts, schools, and other activity areas together through an integrated system of trails and open spaces. And then I'll also show this in context in the new formatting. So we have 2 new policies here in red, and I'll touch on those in the next document.
If I could add, new policies typically addressed a gap or a lack of information, maybe within certain subcategories within a goal. So, which is why the committee would recommend adding those new policies.
Yeah, thank you. It's a long document. And then here you can see another new goal added to preserve, enhance, and protect coordinate system parks and public open spaces. This is the environmental preservation goal, and I'll go through that in the next document more. So here was added some policy language here. And then here, some added language regarding wayfinding, which was one of the directives. Some added language there. So yeah, there was 100 items. That kind of just broadly, you can kind of take a look and see those changes, and then they're also showed here in the revised format. So
I had a question about the very first goal, like on that very first page. Have you been
on the
to
last
that?
document,
Yeah. And- Oops. Or I guess it was goal A. So it was intentional that we took out enhance, diversify, and expand the park system and replace that with build on the legacy of the park system. And is that because we're no longer interested in diversifying the park system and expanding on it? Or like, what was a reason, I guess, for that change? Does anybody remember? That to me, that actually, I kind of preferred the prior language, because it was really, it's specific and instructs us to, create new and different, provide new and different opportunities.
I can't recall the exact conversation around it, but I do know that is touched on in the subsequent policies.
worthwhile to mention, when we worked on this, we took each one as it was written. Actually, they did this, they helped us, walked us through this, and gave it a number so that it was never lost. And then as we started putting them in their new categories, we would make sure that everything was put away. So I don't remember probably any of them in specific, but there's a very good chance that that language had just got transported somewhere else.
Moved
Maybe-
somewhere else.
And I
It
think
does
some of,
look- if I can
Certainly
add
did.
real quick, I mean, as you look at the finished document, you will see that there's some language in policy A1 underneath that goal that speaks to anticipate growth and opportunities by completing and connecting the park system through enhancement, diversification, acquisition, and expansion. So
So it got-
I
so
think
it got
the group
pulled
was
into
looking
some-
at
Yeah. Okay.
redundancies and how to reduce some of those redundancies
Okay.
that were in the program.
There were very few words removed in total. There might have been a duplicated word that would get dropped, but as long as it was represented somewhere else, if it had some meaning.
and to what we
Okay, thank you.
realized in going through some of the filtration of language is sometimes there was repetitive language between a goal and the policies underneath. And so for simplification and for strengthening and cohesion between all of the goals, there were some rewording, but it wasn't changing the essence or the context because all the information was then captured with the policies below.
So there was a good chance this was just duplicative of something else. Okay, thanks.
So yeah, this is sort of the reformatted goals and policies with all that, with the revised language. So, and then highlighted are so in context, you can see how this lays out. So the new connectivity goal is here, connect parks, neighborhoods, business districts, schools, and other activity areas together through an integrated system of trails and open spaces. And then these are two new policies around the green necklace. So ensure green necklace connections provide access to the public lands that surround Issaquah, Cougar, Squawk, and Tiger Mountains, etc. And then C10, provide an east-west mountains to sound trail corridor connecting the green necklace, the creek corridor, and the Rainier Trail corridor through the city and beyond. And then here's another added policy, monitor potential amenity improvements for parks, trails, and open spaces for an enhanced user experience and better functionality. And this was regarding wayfinding, so where that arrow is where the new language is added, but incorporate the use of signage to direct, inform, and educate all park and recreational users. In addition, signage and wayfinding shall link multimodal transportation users to major public destinations and facilities that include cultural amenities, parks, trails, corridors, gateways, transit stops, stations, and parking. And then on the right, again, was an identified gap in the goals, so environmental preservation. And that is preserve, enhance, and protect a coordinated system of parks and public open spaces to preserve the city's natural character, sustain its urban forest resources, and enhance its natural systems, wildlife habitat, and wildlife corridors as a legacy for future generations.
If I can add these two new goals, so connectivity and environmental preservation, there was policy language around those, but again, from a reformatting, felt like it was lost in the document. Certainly recognizing those as primary goals within our park strategic plan, as well as the recently adopted city strategic plan. There's some value in, and I think as a group, you sort of identified where that language was in various spots, pulling it together, and capturing it under one goal.
And then also what's kind of new in this layout are these, using the same word, buckets. So, you know, trail design, plants and vegetation, preserve and protect, just again to kind of help orient you in the document.
And also another item that's new is in the park strategic plan, you'll see each goal or each policy has a title. What we chose to do here was take all the titles away, but instead we highlighted the first key pieces that really highlight what the policy is about. So they are eye-catching, but they don't have titles individually. So that is one of the other major changes between the old policies and the proposed policies before you.
Yeah, so you'll see those underlined in the first spreadsheet. I think this is the last added policy, integrate public art and cultural heritage into the park system for enhancement and educational purposes. Let's see. Yeah. So that's just a broad overview that just to kind of go over those more larger changes with added goal and policy language. There's nothing outstanding that's significant to
Yes, Brad?
go over.
So, I know we kind of went over this, it's been a few months ago now, I can't remember the exact, but we went over the PPC issues that they wanted to have addressed in this, and I think we addressed them. Have they been highlighted or isolated, so it's a lot easier to look through this document to actually see that they've been addressed?
So what we'll do is that crosswalk that Shantae first showed you, that will be part of what goes forward to them, identifying really what changed back and forth, because they like that level of detail. But we'll do a walkthrough of what the significant changes were and things that we felt they should be addressed, and we will highlight, you know, the signage and how that policy is specifically changed, and how some of the user layout and the reorganization fulfills that ease of use that they were looking for.
If I could add, I think as we prepare for that presentation, which right now is scheduled for July, we would begin that narrative, that staff presentation with what their request was and what those specific items were and how we address those, and then go through the walkthrough of track changes.
Because I am accurate, aren't I, that we did address all the issues that
We
PPC
did.
raised, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I can pass it back over to Jen and we can talk about next steps and.
Yeah, so with that, this is an action item on your agenda tonight, and we are seeking park board recommendation per ad hoc committee's hard efforts and your consideration last month and again this month to make a recommendation on these policies that we can then take them forward to the Planning Policy Commission July 25th and subsequently to council for adoption, final adoption.
Will it be coming back to us after PPC reviews it or not?
No.
So if they want to make some changes, you would just do those without our involvement?
If, I would say if there was significant changes or content changes that they wanted to see happen, then we would certainly suggest and recommend that it come back to you all as park board, being the, really that governing body, that these goals and policies are tied to the park strategic plan. But I would just say that's pending what that feedback is.
And it would be helpful to have ad hoc committee representation at the park board, or at the Planning Policy Commission meeting as representation. And as a reminder, we also, as another member, sorry Ron Fall, if you're out there listening, he was a Planning Policy member that was also on the ad hoc committee to help facilitate the communication between the two groups and the changes that were made as well. So, as a reminder to the park board at large.
You send us an email on date and time when that's going to
We
be?
most certainly will.
Can I add one more reminder to next steps, Jen? Great, and thank you, Shantae. And we talked about this in April, so as this goes to Planning Policy Commission with their review and potential blessing, and then on to City Council and that potential adoption, these goals and policies would then be incorporated in to the Park Strategic Plan, would take the place of the previous goals and policies. And then, as we discussed last month when we talked about this, and even as we were adopting the Park Strategic Plan, with the heavy lift that Park Strategic Plan was, sort of reformatting it, as we do that Parks and Strategic Plan update here in, well, now 4 years, as the clock is ticking, we can identify as a board and as staff what key areas do we really want to take a deep dive into, and perhaps if we want to totally do a revision of goals and policies, that might be a goal for us. Something else we identified was level of service, maybe taking a little deeper dive. So I just want to give that context that this revision really allows it, its lifespan could be just with the Park Strategic Plan as is. As we then update it, we could certainly be doing a complete revision at that time, a little deeper, in a deeper dive, if we so choose.
Any other questions or comments? Since this is something we are going to vote on here tonight, Corey or either of you have any?
Yes, do we have to stand and go over there?
Yes, please.
Okay, my son's asleep. It might take me a while. Same page. Don't mind me. It's just.
Take your time.
It's all right, we're ahead of schedule.
Needles right now?
Needles. Okay, I think I'm good. So, this is better than it was before. Not fond of your chart, and I can tell you why. It doesn't say why. It only says we did. And that doesn't give me any information to understand why the change was made, which I think is the core reason for making a change. It just says this is the change. And without the context, you don't understand the implication of what you've done. So for example, the change that Danielle was talking about, it's like, we changed it, but we just moved this language elsewhere so there isn't a loss. Because right now, to somebody looking at your chart, it looks like you dramatically changed something and you're just sort of brushing by. And I don't think that's appropriate if indeed it is somewhere else, and you can't expect the reader to go through and hunt all of that down, because that would be like redoing the whole thing. So if I was on PPC or if I was on City Council, which I would say, I don't get it, do it again. And so that's probably what my suggestion will be to them if that information is not included, because it should just be laid out. These are the changes that were made, this is why we did it, and this is how we carried the information through. We didn't lose it, this is where else it is, right? So, well, I think the policies are improved, and I appreciate that, and the hard work that you did. I'm gonna be cranky with the presentation.
Thank you, Connie. We look forward to cranky, I guess.
Yeah, I know, you love my cranky.
Any other comments on this part of it? If not, can we have a motion to move this forward to PPC as is?
I'll move that we move this forward to PPC as is.
A second from anybody?
Second.
Any other, okay, Ruben second. Any other comments? If If not, all in favor, please say aye.
So
Any objections? Okay, that's our recommendation, is to now move this to PPC in July.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank
If I could add real quickly, thank you, subcommittee members, and Ron, if he's out there, for your involvement, and Shantae and Jen for taking this on. I think the suggestions, the questions, the comments by Connie are spot on in terms of knowing, as we prepare the narrative for the conversation with Planning Policy Commission, giving not only the sort of the starting point of what the goals, what the needs were for us to address, but then as we address them, as you as a subcommittee did your work and deliberated and made those choices as to where to move, how do we make sure we're communicating some of that as well. So we'll proceed with your recommendation, and with that work.
Good. Yeah, and along the lines of what Connie's saying, if there's any notes that could be added to help address that, rather than us to try and have recollection, because I'm not sure we went through so much that I'd be able to, if I was on the stand, to actually say exactly what we did, so.
Yeah, there's quite a legacy there.
Okay, good, thanks. So we're on to the next business item, which is some informational update about the dog park. And Jeff is going to have a few words before it shifts over to Jennifer, as I understand it.
Yeah. Got a PowerPoint presentation tonight. Really is an informational update, as well as discussion with all of you. The focus being on, you'll have seen in your packet the existing conditions report that was done by Watershed Company. We'll also want to highlight some of the coordination work we've been doing with Development Services Department to understand permitting process and elements we'll need to keep into consideration as we move forward. We'll also highlight next steps as to what we anticipate in terms of additional feasibility work as we're continuing this feasibility work for this site, some potential concept design work, public engagement, and then the goal being coming back to you for sort of a go, no-go recommendation later this year. Likely, well, if we have an August recess meeting, likely September. So with that, Jen, take it away.
So as Jeff mentioned, one of the steps of determining if Tibbetts Valley Park was a feasible site for the dog park was to conduct an existing conditions report. The purpose of this report is to identify any potential site constraints, which would aid in planning and design and development of that site. We contracted with the Watershed Company, who in turn performed a tree inventory and wetland delineation. And the park board packet that was published is the full report that was submitted to us. So feel free, and this will get posted on the dog park webpage after tonight's meeting for everyone's viewing and reading pleasure. But tonight we're just gonna really touch on some of the highlights and what the context of the report was. Go ahead. So at the Tibbetts Valley Park site, the existing conditions report studied an area of about 2.8 acres. The existing conditions report looked at the site both during the March and April period. And in the tree inventory, they found that the overall stand of trees on the existing site is very healthy. There are no trees that are of high or severe risk that would need absolute immediate removal. There's no obvious signs of pest infestation and no widespread disease. So that's really fortunate for us when we're looking at trying to maintain some of the existing site character. Overall, 124 trees were assessed as part of the inventory. If you walk out on site, you'll see they all have tags and numbers on them, please leave them. They are for reference to the report, and we will be using those in time. Of the 124 trees assessed, overall 26 were recommended for eventual removal and are in either poor condition or are dead and dying. Of that 26, there are only 6 that are in process of dead or dying, and those are your alder trees and 2 apple trees. Of the 26 overall, it's again mostly alder trees, which are a native plant. Some call them invasive, some call them native trees, but they have taken over the site. And there's a black locust, a birch, and the apple trees that are recommended. So some good news is the tree study also found a very healthy western red cedar that has a 58-inch diameter breast height, which means that's a significant tree that we'd want to save and preserve, and it's in very good health. So fun little fact. Moving on to the wetland report. There are two small wetlands located on the site. However, they're very similar in size and shape and character to the wetlands that were identified back in 1999 in a study that was conducted as part of the master site plan, Tibbetts Valley Park site plan. They've very little shape and change of character, so that is good news to me, and there's not a lot of changing site conditions. These are classified as Class 4 wetlands, which are less than 2,500 square feet, and no buffers are required for those. So a lot of wetlands will have a 50-foot buffer, so we don't need to stay, or higher, depending upon the class of the wetland. And so this allows us to not have to maintain some of those distances when we look at designing and utilizing the park space. So the good news is with both the tree assessment and the wetland assessment, as Jeff had mentioned earlier, there's no real fatal flaws with the site. As far as next steps, we're going to be creating some design concepts and looking at some material options. What type of fencing would go in, gate, some benches and some other site features that might be included. And with those concepts, we'll also be sending those out to the public for engagement and comment on, so we can get an idea of what people would like to see out there in the park. This is not your typical design project, so we look forward to seeing what the community has to say as far as what would work and where entrances are and pathways and so on and so forth. And as we engage with that, we'll also start looking at kind of our budget and how that's all gonna pan out as far as how far can our budget stretch, what can we do with some maybe volunteer efforts to be able to then help inform our permitting process. We have spoken with our Development Services Department, and this will be processed as a Level 2 Administrative Site Development Permit. Once we submit for permitting, we will begin to prepare the site and eventual construction. And if we go down to the next slide, here's kind of a timeline, and we'll get this also posted up to the website. It's kind of as of today, where we're kind of forecasting all of this work to take place. So right now we're in Q2, and we'd be looking, we've completed our site evaluation and assessment, and we're doing our update right now. We're gonna start in on some of the design concepts and hope to get those out to you in Q3, which is June, which hard to believe is only a couple weeks away. June and July, we'll be doing the concepts and public engagement, maybe into August, and then depending upon when park board meeting is, likely August, September, seeking actual recommendation of what we're considering the feasible site right now as we continue through site investigation, design concepts, and seeing if this is really gonna work for the public as our as a dog park site. And then into Q4, we'd be going through our permitting processes and site preparation and construction. So with that, any questions on the report or?
I have a couple, actually.
Yes.
One is I noticed on the tree inventory list that there were a couple trees listed as poor, but were not indicated to remove. Is there a reason for that?
Just because something's in poor condition doesn't always mean it's recommended for removal due to a tree rating scale. So we'd be taking a close look at those, and those are certainly trees that, since no trees are hazardous, there were none that were recommended right out of the gate that we had to remove in order for the public to be able to access it. We will likely be looking at removing some of those that are more risk or are in process of dead and dying, and go ahead and thin those out prior to that, but those would be trees that we would certainly monitor and do frequent assessments on until it got to the point that it did become hazardous, in which case we'd want to remove them in advance of reaching those conditions.
Seems like now's the time to remove them rather than after the park's in place.
Well, but some of those.
It's not like these are jewel trees.
Well-
These were alders and apple trees that
True.
have outlived their life, so.
True.
Well,
And
and, yeah, and it's a
there-
great question, and I think the recommendation helps inform concept design. I think as we now look at concept designs, those are some of the things that we'll want to consider is what would it look like to have a few more maybe open areas and remove a few more trees? And what does it look like to preserve some more trees? And again, give some variety and options and be able to get some feedback from the community.
That sounds good. Got a lot of design to play into it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
I
it's,
like that.
even though not all of the fruit trees out there were recommended for removal, it's likely recommended because fallen fruit and dogs don't always, digestive systems don't always process it. And so that's something from a health and safety standpoint, it would be more helpful to remove those than to keep them on site. So something we will look at as we further down the road. But the good news is there's no high-risk trees. It is a healthy plant stand, which is great for us as we look to future potential use of the site.
So I didn't really see in the report addressing drainage issues or any of that particularly. Did I miss that, or is that not something that they were called upon to look at, or?
There's no real issues pertaining to site drainage. The site naturally drains, and the two wetlands that are identified are slope wetlands, which are due to depressions, typically unhilled areas where water naturally collects. Those haven't changed much shape or size over the years, so that's good news that the site is self-draining and doing well.
So Jen, maybe you can clarify, so Watershed didn't, as they identified those two wetlands, they didn't identify them, they identified them by review of the whole site and
Correct.
looking at sort of
Correct.
hydrology
Yes.
of the whole site, and
Yeah.
those were the two areas that, you know,
Correct.
And as I read that, it's expected that those will be fenced?
That's a recommendation, but that's not necessarily a design requirement. I think it's more to make sure park users are not in there or safe, but we have many wetlands that are in class 4 situations or even higher functioning wetlands that we don't fence. So I think it's something.
Might not be in as high an area of public traffic like this.
Well, it also depends on how we design and use the site as to what level of access there might be. So I think that's something to be further vetted as we can consider. I mean, that's no different than, are we gonna leave a tree as a snag, or are we gonna just fall it and leave it on site? It's kind of that level of detail for site conditions, or a tree to be a log for dogs to climb on and jump over.
so again, that's an area, an element that we can look and let design options inform, as well as certainly work with Development Services Department in terms of how they'll want us to address that.
Right. Yep.
And clarify me a little bit about timing, which I'm a little hazy about, in terms of when the board is expected to make a recommendation and move forward? It almost sounded like that was coming to us to do after permitting had already occurred?
No, so what we'd like to do is come back to you with, create some design concepts, vet those with the public, make sure that the site is still meeting the needs of the community, and bring that information back to the park board at that time. And for recommendation, in which case then we can start the permitting process.
Okay, I missed that, thanks.
And we tried to capture that in the timeline too, that, again, it's probably a little small to see in the PowerPoint, but as this will be on the website as well, and just a way, and this timeline also tried to, we'll talk a little bit about our updates here in the next topic, but just, this has been a process, and we are at a certain point, a single point in a process. There's still some more work to do in that process that, again, started last year with exploring a number of sites of existing city-owned land for potential consideration. You'll note, end of Q3 is when we're looking at sort of that go, no-go decision by the park board following engagement and looking at concepts, and then permitting happening after that. So, just to clarify for the listening and viewing audience as well.
Yeah, the only reason I say that is because the design and permitting from this worksheet basically ends at the end of August, and that's what threw me a little bit about permitting and when it's coming to us. So you're saying permitting is actually going to go into more in the fourth quarter to some extent?
Yeah, and I think yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So, the fences that are potentially put around the wetlands, will that be considered a buffer? Or, I mean, because it
Buffers
says
aren't
that you're not required to put a buffer around. And so, would the fence be a buffer or no?
But no, a buffer pertains to the width that you need to stay away from
Yeah.
the wetland. So, again, as we talk with development services and go through design options, if there is a fence, the fence could be right at the edge of the wetland.
Okay.
There's not with that classification and that size of an isolated wetland, there's not a buffer necessarily that is tied to that type.
Is there an expectation that humans and animals stay out of the wetland in order to preserve it?
Again, depending on its, we'll need to work, and we'll take the lead of development services in terms of how to best manage that. We would not program it. We would not want to be in any way
Encouraging dogs?
encouraging that as a program element
Yeah.
of it, right? So we need to figure out how to best manage that. But there's ways that can be done.
But they're technically, being a class 4 wetland, they're technically unregulated, so that does leave a little bit of barrier. But there's other wetlands throughout the city when you start looking around, that are much higher functioning, much higher quality wetlands that don't have fences, so.
They also don't have off-leash dogs.
Next to
Some
the-
do.
Really?
Yeah.
Concerning.
But,
Well,
No.
not technically, they're not off-leash.
Right.
but
let's
regardless,
let's
we will be
clarify.
very specific and very conscious in our design of this park, because we don't wanna degrade, something that's functioning as a wetland. But that's just something we'll need to work through as we work through those design elements.
Yep. So there's just to differentiate, right, where there are dogs off leash in areas of the city that we are not inviting or encouraging. Yes, there are some unregulated off-leash dog uses. In the case where we're looking at conceptually designing an area that we are intending to inviting not just one dog, but multiple dogs, we're gonna want to manage that space in a different way than a wetland somewhere else within our park system. So these are all, again, factors of design consideration and why sort of this this next step and this checkpoint now is to say, hey, here's what we found out. It informs us. This information is really going to help us inform some design options as we go back out to the community and see if this feasible site is the one that we want to land on. So more to come.
Any other questions or comments from the board on this topic?
Will we have an opportunity, sorry, I have a hard time focusing on the text there, but, will we have an opportunity in, June or July, kind of before you go out to the public with design options to have a chance to take a look at it? Or you're gonna come up with design options and then just go straight to the public and then come back to us?
Good question. I don't know that we had decided.
We haven't finalized. I'll be honest, our thought right now, given timeline, was to create some design concepts, share those with the public to get feedback. Again, the intent of those concepts is not, hey, you absolutely have to choose A, B, or C. We're really gonna seek feedback and see what may be of interest to the community in either of those, and likely be steering towards some type of meshing of options, right? That I think as park board meetings fall through that process, we would be informing you and keeping you updated. If that's something you all want, is to see those concepts before we go into the public, we can certainly make that happen. We'll want to look at the timeline and see how and where that falls.
I would think it might be useful to do it kind of, if you're going out to the public, also come and get our input at that time too. So that if you're combining ideas and whatnot, you're sure to like include what it is. It might be more efficient to do it that way than to wait till the end and then get our feedback.
I think it would be more at the meshing if we were sending out different options,
Yeah.
bringing that meshing to you.
That's a great point, and yeah, our intent would be to be sharing the concepts with you as the board, as well as share them with the public where we would be.
And the design is all gonna be in-house?
It's the intent right now, yes. We'll have to see how, how it all goes, but yes, that is the concept right now.
Concept on the concepts.
Yes.
A lot of concepts
Yes,
going on.
yes.
Okay.
And in reality, I mean, there's quite a bit of fence and site work and some other things, so it's really gonna, as we develop the concepts and balance the available budget, really have to work and see where best. It's gonna be good to just maybe seek some contracting help and where we can really maximize volunteer efforts too. So that's further down once we know what we're looking at as far as some of the design.
Any other specific dog parks in the region that you're looking at as a model as you do this design work?
All of them
All
that
of
we
them?
had looked at in 2015. You know, there's multiple fencing options and gate options and
Incorporate the
designs.
best of the best kind of thing?
Yeah. Yep.
And then I guess the last time that I remember, well, when we had some options that went out to the public with Confluence Park and the bridge. And when we did that, we had the pictures of the bridges without any sort of like concept about cost and whatnot. And as it turned out, those bridges, there was a wide variety of costs associated with them. And I kind of suspect that if people knew what what cost was associated with the bridges, that might have influenced their decisions. And so I just want to keep that in mind as we're going out to the public to ask about options, that if there's, a big disparity in what something's going to cost, to try to somehow capture that, in a survey, so.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, and where if possible, we can identify specific costs, we would. Even, I think, as we took the approach within the park strategic plan, even if we're identifying via dollar signs, or if there is a noticeable difference between concepts, sizable difference between concepts, we would want to make sure the public's lending feedback, or they're able to be informed with the feedback that they're given.
And
I
maybe-
think the other thing that's gonna be helpful in this too, back to what I said earlier, unlike the bridge where it was sort of, hey, choose A, B, or C, I think in this case, as we look at options, as we become informed by successful dog parks around us and elements of dog parks and incorporate those into the concepts, I wouldn't be surprised that the feedback we're gonna get is more elements within the options that we're trying to create, and again, being budget conscious of.
There could be a case where one element costs the same amount as 4, right? And if
Yes.
people know that, well, maybe that one element is so cool that they would choose that, but otherwise, maybe they'd prefer to have these other, 3 or 4. So I guess I just wanted to throw that out as sort of, I think we sort of missed that in the past, and we could do, keep that in
I
mind.
think within some of these elements within the dog agility run, other obstacles or other things, trying to identify, again, specific price point if that's doable, or even price range. Hey, this is a relatively expensive option of the scale of, X thousand to Y thousand. So that there's an understanding as people are getting feedback.
Well, and we
A
can.
wrought iron fence is probably a little more expensive, and not that we're proposing that.
You might be giving up a few elements.
No.
And we can maybe weight that feedback to some extent, because there might be some really cool options that maybe everybody wants, but it's too expensive now, so maybe that's something that gets phased in later on, or something. But if everybody knew these different components of what the cost, we could do this cost now versus have to wait 2 or 3 years. And so I think we'll have to spend some time how this gets out to the public to get
think
their
so.
feedback.
And that's a tricky balance, because depending upon the project, you also want to allow that flexibility and freedom to, design unhindered, right? Because what could be, and how you're going to make it happen. And, maybe we do, a pop-up tent or whatever, I don't know. Coming up with silly ideas, which, it's been a long day, sorry. That wasn't silly. But, there's that appropriate time in doing that as well, because you also want to have those liberties of thought to be able to come up with some creative designs, and then there becomes that practical piece as to how you're gonna get it done within budget and what can be part of a future phase or future improvement, and be part of the design, but be able to call it out as that future piece. So it's a dance.
Adding on to what Danielle said, I just would appreciate also if it delineated where the wetlands were, and then also explained not just, the cost of everything, but also told people where the wetlands were, and then maybe the significance of preserving them and the design choices, because I might be worried that people would choose a design that maybe didn't prioritize preserving those areas, like let's say there were no fences around it for other reasons. So I just want that, such as cost. So I would appreciate if that were something that was explained to people as well.
Can you pull back up the wetland? I just want to point out real quick, the locations.
Are identified, yeah.
The northernmost wetland, that's actually a little closer to the parking lot area. And then the other one is closer to a mound out on site that is out there. So, one of them may not even actually be within what we would fence, just as a entry area, so just as a thought.
By the parking lot.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, that might be outside the fenced area.
A great point, Jacob, and to that point, these conceptual designs would identify where those are specifically.
Yeah, and I guess I was just trying to, I guess I didn't really frame that the best, but I was saying less just where it was, but more the significance of different design choices and how they might impact how people interact with those parts of the area.
Would the design include any changes to the existing sort of infrastructure or additions to infrastructure, say maybe like a water fountain or something like that, or would that be something that would be later, or how would that kind of thing fit in?
So water was one of those items that, has been talked about along the way. Where to locate that is also gonna be a cost issue because there's not water readily available at some of the upper portions of the site. So that's one thing that maybe is a now, something that's maybe closer to the playground where we can easily get water. A little further up to the northern part might have to be a future piece of improvement. But if that's something we hear out of the public process, that they really want one up there, eventually, you might be able to get one, but it just might take some time and additional resources to get it built.
But yeah, some of that infrastructure and desires that we've already heard from the public, those will be design elements that will be in these options.
Any other board questions or comments? I don't normally do this, but this is a hot topic and one of the main projects for this year. So if the community has any comments about the dog park, it's a good time to share those.
So code doesn't allow impacts to Category 4 wetlands without mitigation. So if you allow intrusion into the wetland, you will have to create equal amount of wetland with buffer somewhere else. So you can't impact the wetlands, and that also means hydrologically. So if you regrade, you cannot impact the hydrology of those wetlands. And so anything you do uphill, including taking down trees, impacts the hydrology, and so you're gonna have to understand how that all works together. And it's gonna have to be fenced because clearly you're impacting the quality of even the Category 4 wetland if you do not. And if you notice, the study says you also are going to be having to replant and improve them with native vegetation if they suggested, if you do something around those wetlands. So you're actually going to be having to enhance the wetlands from the critical area studies perception. So you'll notice that the upper wetland is spring fed. It is not just gathered from the site, which means you are gonna have a 365-day-a-year water source at that point. So you're never getting rid of that water, so it is not a candidate for fill. The other one is interesting because access issues, because that's the slippery muck place, and you're gonna have to try to figure out how to not impact that wetland while you're creating access somewhere. Now the other map, if you remember in the past, showed steep slopes on this site. Steep slopes have a basic 50-foot buffer where you cannot remove native vegetation within 50 feet of the top of that steep slope unless you do a steep slope study indicating that there will be no changes to the stability of that steep slope via any water that might be going down them, etc. And then you can reduce it to a 10-foot steep slope buffer with that critical area study. So at this point in time, seeing how the 1999 version showed quite nicely the wetlands, they also outlined these steep slopes. So I think in between on your little timeline, you're gonna have to do a critical area study to see if you can reduce that steep slope buffer, or at least identify what a 50-foot buffer is from the edges of those steep slopes to understand how much land you actually have to work with. So I'm a little concerned by the code not coming in early with this project, because I think if we knew what the code requirements were early on in this project, because we already had it all mapped, then we would have had a much more rational statement of how much land we potentially had to work with on this site. So I don't know. One last one is stormwater. Stormwater is stable now, forested, nobody using it. But what we have is we have fecal coliform from the dogs, And fecal coliform is a Department of Ecology issue where you get fecal coliform hits in your stormwater and also in your wetlands from dog park areas. So Stacy with Public Works, not Public Works, she's in planning, is the one who would be able to tell you what sort of water quality treatment you have to have when you know full well you're going to be introducing a tremendous amount of fecal coliform into an area that's a slope heading down to, I don't know, water quality treatment and potentially taking out trees, which that's part of that calculation for how much stormwater you have to handle. So basically, if you clear the vegetation, you are going to have excess stormwater that will be your responsibility because you are changing the site. So all of these things, I think, need to be looked at in the next month so that then you can actually understand what you're gonna have to do with the site. Now, who am I? I'm just a person who reads the code and deals with DSD all the time and the private development all the time. And so, you don't have to trust me. I'm here to tell you this is what's gonna come to light in the future. So, please, an advanced meeting with DSD and to deal with stormwater so that you can get a jump on it so we aren't having to go back and back and back, okay? Thanks.
Thanks, Connie. Good points. I assume that that'll all be dealt with.
It's already been discussed and will continue to be discussed in our coordination with DSD. Yep, good points.
And wouldn't Watershed have had knowledge of code when they were doing their assessment of this?
It's referenced in the.
Okay. Small amount. Any other comments about dog park from the community?
Corey Christensen. So I want to talk a little bit about the process up to date, and I'm not particularly a fan of it. Now, the problem is that, let's see, circling back to the beginning and talking at the August meeting, people asked about cost, people asked about design criteria. We still have not gotten a number, and we still don't have design criteria. We have a scatter of criteria, but they aren't ranked as far as this is the minimum for a dog park, this is the next layer we could add, and then this is the next layer beyond that. In essence, what it appears to me is that we're in the process of building a swimming pool that has a mud bottom. And that concerns me because some of these basic parts of a dog park, field surface, drainage, are really important, and they're not necessarily the things that the public sees. They expect you guys to be the rock stars and the people that are knowledgeable about it, but so far in the material that you presented, you haven't given anybody an indication that that's the case. Because the look we had at the other dog parks is a very, very surface look. It doesn't really get into what they've done and what they have done as far as improvements since they put the dog parks in, which all surrounds field surface and drainage and all of those things. And the process you're talking about moving forward, where you're talking about pushing this to the public to talk about fencing, gates, benches, that kind of stuff. If you looked at Robbinswood Park, Luther Burbank Park, and the Beaver Lake Park in Sammamish, the gates, the fences, they're almost all identical. And so talking about that is really not much of anything to talk about. It still circles back to the hard questions, which are the water access and the field drainage and surface water coming across. And that's where the huge expenses are. And I think we need to be looking at this in a much more serious way, looking at what these other dog parks, what they look like now, where they were 10 years ago, in other words, the changes they've made, and look at this as a full product. One of the problems of not presenting numbers is public, and I've been advocating for a dog park for 15 or 20 years, you give us nothing to advocate for. Because we have the roughly $200,000 placeholder, but $200,000 is not enough money when you start looking at just the bare bones basics of fencing on a flat, dry piece of land, or reasonably dry. And when you add in steep slope, you add in water, you add in all of these other things, and to level this property out, you're probably gonna be building retaining walls, and the access with these wetlands at the bottom, especially the one that's the second one that's towards the sport court that was not on the previous 1999 study. That poses a problem because that was one of the areas where we were thinking there might be access because it's easier to move up through there. So that just complicates things even more. All of those complications are not necessarily unsolvable, but they add cost, a lot of cost. Right now, the way you're presenting this, I would be advocating to say no dog park, because I wouldn't trust to give you guys the money. What you need to be doing is being more forthcoming with the costs and what it's gonna take to build a real dog park, one that from the beginning is gonna be clean, it's gonna be safe, it's gonna be a place that people are gonna wanna go and take their dogs and all of that, instead of saying, we're gonna make whatever we can make and then deal with all the problems, which you're gonna have a lot of problems, and have people unhappy. And so that's gonna cost more money, and what we need to be doing is being more straightforward with the money, the cost, and letting the rest of us advocate for something that's actually gonna be, from the beginning, a decent dog park. And maybe this site isn't that site. It's really hard to know because we still don't have the information as far as what Connie was talking about, the steep slope buffers, some of this other stuff, the amount of grading we can do in there. There's a bunch of things we still don't know. And hopefully this site will work, but I think it's gonna take more money. But you need to be upping the game, and especially for this, bringing the next round out to the public, because talking about fences and all that, you guys sound like used car dealers. You don't sound like experts, and you need to be sounding like experts and bringing in what other dog parks are doing, what other cities have done. Look at Mercer Island, look at Bellevue, look at Olympia right now. They're looking at 3 sites for a dog park. They have a 2006 study that analyzes other dog parks in the area that's actually pretty good. It's 13 years old, it could be better, but it mentions things like field surface, all these tough things. Now, will they end up dealing with that? Hard to say. But the point is we need to deal with that, and deal with it with the idea that if we're investing in a site, it needs to be the site that's gonna be a site to be proud of, like the skate park, all of these things, not diving into something that's the wrong site. So I think for when we're talking about bringing things out to the public, I think you guys can make decisions on the fencing and the gates and all that. We don't need to be talking about that. We need to be talking about the hard decisions. I think the water access may be at the bottom, not the top. Okay, that's reasonable. I think the field surface and drainage, though, that needs to be dealt in the beginning. Anyway, I think you guys still can do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. Any other comments? If not, we'll move on to our next item.
So I have a comment about that,
Okay.
or just some response. I guess I had thought that when we were talking about getting public input, it was on like design elements within the park, like different features, not necessarily fencing or surface or whatnot, but that you guys would be making the recommendations for that. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a mix. I think
Okay.
looking at both amenities within the dog park, looking at how to address surfacing. I think Corey's comments are spot on, that let's learn from our partners and other public agencies that have been doing this. So it won't be just options on gates and fences.
The other thing that would be helpful, and you guys probably have this already and it's just not part of this presentation, but for me at least, it would be helpful to have a map of the site with the wetlands on there with the slopes, with whatever buffer is gonna be required to come out of the slopes, with the tree, with that, and then with the, you know, the tree study kind of layered on, so we can see like where it is that the trees would most likely come out. And so,
So this actually shows that, and this is within your existing conditions report. What I did here is the blue trees and the yellow are the ones that were recommended for removal. So I've highlighted those in a different color, just so you can see amongst the sea, kind of where the distribution of those are.
and what are the
green
big
belt.
green areas that are,
So those are
like, there's that
tree-
blue
those are-
swoosh, but-
Oops, sorry, I'm driving on somebody else's computer here. So you can see the two wetland areas. The one right down by the parking lot is the blue orb, and
so
then
those
there's-
are the wetlands, okay?
Yep, and then the one in the middle are the identified. The others are the larger areas of tree coverage. So there's a large stand of birch and aspen out there that are naturally occurring. Those are the polygons that are the larger groupings of trees. There's so many trees within there, they didn't individually assess each
Got it.
one. So that's what those represent.
And does this have also, I don't, like the slopes and the kind of the development
not.
buffers on there?
But so it's also a little hard right now because there's concepts and those are higher level ideas as to how a site would be developed. And then as you start into the permitting, there's sometimes a little more detailed review and site refinement that comes out of that process. So we will, as we go forward with the designs, because how to deal with some grade in some areas, like accessing off of the parking lot, is gonna be part of that consideration. So those will be part of the future things that come forward in the concept design layouts.
I think it's some great feedback, and I think as those concepts are created, I would imagine we will be creating a visual that will be an overview of the site. We'll
Yeah.
have these site conditions identified on them, which show maybe a mix of fence alignments, right, within options, how we, again, address those conditions and what we would need to do to mitigate those conditions or changes. So, yeah, we'll try and, I think your suggestion of these design concepts showing some of these layers within that so that we sort of understand and can think through the trade-offs.
And the developable space that we actually are playing with. And like, for me, I have a hard time visualizing that when it's just like, you know, an acre and a half, but I can visualize it if it's in relation to another, you know, park. So like this would be similar to,
So
you know,
pretty-
the green space at, you
Or even
know,
other dog parks.
at Harvey Manning Park or something like that, you know. Or another dog park, yeah.
So do you guys know how much space would be left over after you take into account the different slopes, things like that? Do you know what sort of shape that would end up with?
It's what we had calculated before, which was 2.4 acres, plus or minus. So really, the areas that are taken out are the two wetlands and the knob that's kind of out there now. There's a naturally, it's an old site that is now treed over. There's a little knob out on site, which is within the central green blob. It's right in around that area. So there will be a portion of that that's not accessible. But again, Danielle, as far as size and relationship, the 2 acre is relative to what's happening over at Beaver Lake, as far as their development, and Luther Burbank is around 2 as well. Little smaller,
Yeah,
1.6. So this will be right in those ballparks.
Okay,
Thank
move
you.
on. Looks like you're talking about park projects.
Yeah, I think I'll keep this one brief. You saw in your agenda of a color-coded spreadsheet. This is our attempt at taking a look at our 2019 major projects capital projects and initiatives that we had shared with you earlier in the year, and creating a sort of at-a-glance look that will not only keep you as park board informed, but community informed as we post this on the website, city council informed as we're updating them as to where we're at, as we're tracking on these projects. I won't go through every single one of them in the descriptions. I know we've done that in prior months. I wanted to, again, offer this up to you and let you know that we will be on our park projects website, be listing this. Our intent is at a minimum to update this quarterly. I think as a team, we're sort of thinking through what's realistic for providing updates. You'll notice the red pin is sort of intended to be a "you are here" kind of statement. You'll notice within each of the projects, as we identify the 4 sort of prominent quarters of the year, the color coding has to do with trying to visually demonstrate sort of the different phases of any capital project. The salmon color, or the orangey salmon color, being planning, concept design work, sort of initial level, higher level planning work that's going on with the project. As that morphs into more of a design and permitting process, we wanted to demonstrate that with sort of that yellowish color, and then the blue would identify any of the actual construction goals that we have identified within 2019. So would love any questions you have about any of the projects, or just general feedback on the format, whether you think it's helpful or harmful in terms of trying to keep the community updated on a lot of work that we're doing. And we really want to also be able to communicate, kind of as we talked about the dog park, right? We're having moment in time conversations, but those conversations are part of a bigger thread of work that's going on. So
I think this is super helpful, like it a lot. I'll be interested to see sort of how you demonstrate adjustments, because, you know, things do move, so that'll be maybe a little challenge. But this helps me to sort of identify, in particular, like the Confluence Park irrigation project. It's supposed to be in Q3, which is the height of summer, and I just hope that doesn't block off the park for people to use. So I don't know if it will or not, but that park, you know, we built it and then we fenced it off, and then we allowed people to use it for a while, and then like the next summer we fenced it off again. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that, especially in the summer, in the summertime.
very much kept that in mind as we are working through that project.
Question.
Thoughts, comments? Yeah.
On page 2, there's the air conditioning
Yes.
projects. Just curious how that became a Parks Department.
Yeah, so Parks and Recreation Department also has facilities within it. So we oversee all facility planning and capital projects. So, yep.
So you said,
I have a question on that for Jeff. Can you give an update on the Eck House?
yeah, we're not doing open questions.
Oh, great, sorry.
Yeah. Be happy to talk after the meeting, yeah.
You started this first quarter,
Started this.
this process?
Yep.
Okay. Have you had to make much adjustments, or have you stayed online pretty well?
It's been okay. We've, the bike park, I think as we updated all of you on one of the elements of that bike park was to get grant funding. We were notified that we weren't successful in getting that grant funding this year, so that bumped. You'll notice in the narrative, we made that communication. What we plan to do, and I think this to some of the prior points about understanding so many moving parts of these projects, that there are tweaks and changes and shifts as we update this from one quarter to another. We would have some type of track changes or some sort of color coding as we make a change from, say, now till, boy, when we do the third quarter update, we'd want to sort of color code in all of those updates that have happened between the prior update.
And I'm assuming all of these projects were taken off the short-term timeline from the strategic plan? Or has this been altered in some way?
No, this is as we communicated with you last year as we were going through the capital budget process. These are our identified 2019 capital projects that did come right out of the adoption of the Park Strategic Plan. So, yep. One informs the other.
Good.
Yep.
Got it on that?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess, well, you just don't get a break, do you? I guess you're now talking about master planning.
Yeah. Going for time.
Good, right on time, actually.
Good, good. Yeah, so coming out of the Park Strategic Plan, good segue to your prior question. As you recall, as we adopted that, one of the really priorities that came out of that work, one of the priority projects was initiating some master plans, some site-specific master planning. 3 projects really percolated from our prioritization process. That was looking at Tibbetts Valley Park, Veterans Memorial, Park, Depot Park, and Pedestrian Park, sort of in a more collective fashion, as they support Old Town was certainly a priority. And then this concept and vision of creating a unified park element from Squaw Valley Park, which is our northern border, all the way to Lake Sammamish, through Lake Sammamish State Park, which we've identified as the Issaquah corridor. Those 3 projects really came out as a strong priority and I think were really identified when we were adopting the Park Strategic Plan as really core elements of our future park system. As we really explored how to initiate those master plans, we, in working with administration, identified a goal rather than doing those one by one. What would it look like to solicit a consultant to assist us and look at least launching all of those efforts collectively, and then allowing and understanding the work of each of those individual projects may take a little longer or be on a different time frame, but understanding those 3 elements are not isolated. They really do have a role in relationship with one another. So in recognizing all of that, we sent out requests for qualifications a couple months ago. I think by compiling these 3 projects together, got a lot of interest from very, very strong landscape architect firms. Brad, you were part of our interview process about a month ago. We interviewed 5 firms and 5 teams to see who we might want to partner with in this work. Had some really, really hard decisions and choices to make. There were some very strong teams. The recommendation, though, was to proceed with Methuen Architects. They're a landscape architect firm in Seattle. The strength of work that they've done in the region, both for site-specific park projects, but also corridor projects. They've just recently been working with Metro Parks Tacoma, Metropolitan Park District of Tacoma, their full name, on Ruston Way. Metro Parks is looking at sort of re-envisioning Ruston Way and how Ruston Way connects to Point Defiance Park. If you're familiar with that part of Tacoma, I think that the strength of work that they did there, I think really resonated well with what we're trying to do in pulling all of our public spaces and creating this unified public element that would run through Issaquah north-south. Excited that Methuen is very excited to work with us, so we're finalizing that scope of work and getting that contract pulled together. We anticipate launching this process here in the next month or two, you all as Park Board, much like the Park Strategic Plan, will really serve as the steering committee of that work. There'll be a broad approach of public engagement that will, I think, take a variety of forms. One of the things we'll be doing as that contract is underway is pulling a wide variety of interest groups for those 3 sites to help us sort of pull together goals and purposes for this work. So if you could imagine both sports groups that use Tibbetts Valley Park to some of our private partners that are in and around from Downtown Issaquah Association to other nonprofits that and community groups that utilize these spaces, Issaquah Alps Trails Club. So really a diverse group of interests and groups, pull them together here to really help shape the goals and purposes of that work. Take advantage of our summer events to have some public engagement in and around both farmers market and concerts, utilizing a strong online presence through Peak Democracy, as well as having some real focused public meetings. We really, I think, are excited, very much excited as staff to engage with the community on these 3 really, really important elements. A piece as we're finalizing the contract that I hope will pique your interest here really in short order. One of the things we'd like to do really early on in this effort is to do a sort of survey current use of these spaces. So we are going to try and solicit and recruit 6 to 8 volunteers that are going to help us do site surveys. You're not going to be out asking to interview users, but this is really more of an observational assessment of these spaces. How is our community using them? Quite frankly, how is our community not using these spaces? So if you have any interest, we'll also be reaching out to some of our other community partners, but if you've got interest, we'd love to pull you in, and Methuen would train you up, and we'd look to be doing that in the coming weeks as we get the contract finalized. So reach out to Shantae, Jen, or I if you're interested in that. This is going to be an exciting endeavor as we get going. As you'll notice in the timeline, and as we sort of finalize this work and really get into the work, and as I said earlier, I would anticipate that this work, this planning effort, will morph into 2020. It's not something that we necessarily want to do in haste. These are 3 real anchor elements to the system currently, and I think the system that we want and how we want the system to perform 20, 30, 50 years from now. So this is work that we see launching this summer, but certainly moving into 2020. So excited to bring Methuen on board as partners in this effort. I don't know if you have anything to add, Brad, as you went through those interviews.
No, it was a tough choice. We had some really good ones.
Yep.
And I think Methuen should give us a different perspective maybe than what we've had in the past, which I think will be a good thing. One of the things I was real encouraged about is the amount of national park work that they've done, and from all over the place. And so I think that's good to give us a different feel from what we've had in the past. So I'm encouraged. You can mark me up. I want to be one of the participants, if you didn't know that already.
Great.
Volunteers?
Yeah,
Great.
right.
So I think I'm excited about this process as well. I do want to point out, so Tibbetts Valley Park and Veterans Memorial are the 2 city-owned properties that have grass baseball fields. And Tibbetts is the only one in the city that has lights. So the high schools don't have lights on their fields, and so Tibbetts is, often you drive by it all, every day, and often there are no users, in that park, or in those fields. But when they are used, they're used actively and heavily. And so and if we were to repurpose those somehow, we would lose a precious asset to our community. So I just want to make sure that we're just cognizant of that, and of the lack of other opportunities for, we don't have other replacement facilities. And a turf all-purpose field with a baseball diamond is, it's useful, but it's not the same as an actual baseball field. And then the other thing I want to ask is, do we have, are we talking to the school district at all about partnering in any context in these parks? Because, for example, the new middle school that's going in is in a spot that doesn't have a lot of, extra space compared to some other facilities that the school district has. So I think there's might be an opportunity to
Absolutely, yeah.
partner.
The school district will be one of those interest groups that will be
Okay.
part of this, this
Great.
effort from the get-go. Absolutely. And you're right, existing program of those spaces is a very, very important consideration, and knowing, as we look at diversifying our system, we also have some pretty high needs in terms of athletic field space, so,
Right.
Yeah.
And you can definitely use space, different ways, and a lot of cities have kind of merged a baseball field with other, with other uses. So there's lots of examples of that out there, but.
Any other questions, comments?
No, I just wanted to add that the public life survey, we are looking to get that rolling here really, really quick. So if anyone is interested, please let me know ASAP. I would like to accelerate that because we're trying to get the group together, try to set up a schedule, questions, all that stuff, and really try and get that work going in the next couple of weeks. Because that'll help inform our site analysis work as well as some of the design options. So it's really important that we get out and start understanding what's happening out in our parks. So if anyone's interested, looking at likely a couple of weeks, the more people we have, the less hours that'll be needed.
Lighter load for everybody.
But likely visiting a couple of sites various times a week, and we can schedule them up. And it's gonna be just watching how people are using the park and recording that information. And you'll get trained with information. Ruben? Great, thank you. Anybody else right now feeling?
So when you're layering this with the knowledge of the other, ways that the parks are programmed, right? Because for example, when school's out, Tibbetts is gonna be full of, sports camps,
Yeah.
right? Which is totally different than what's happening now.
Yeah.
So you're talking about kind of just unscheduled use of the
Yes.
parks.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. And I think what's important to that point is, these are moment in time sort of assessments, and it's not meant to be the end-all be-all sense of how these spaces are used. It's just, I think, another way to really capture how they're performing, aside from obvious programmatic uses. Yeah.
Any other comments? Is that a wrap on that?
That's a wrap, so more to come.
You need a little break?
Yeah,
Or
go
you,
for it. Take a break.
We oughta we're getting
We should
a
work
trend
on
here, we
that. I
should
know.
just change that.
I'll work on that, that's on me.
Yeah, okay. I just had a couple things. One is, I wanted to talk a little bit about attendance that's been a bit troubling in recent months, and really just kind of open it up for discussion to some extent in terms of what might be the cause, if there even is one. I know everybody's so busy, and certainly we appreciate all the time that the members of the board give to the community. But it it is important that we all try and make a concerted effort to be here as much as possible, especially with so many items that are going on, with having to make some recommendations to the city. I just want to make it clear about what the importance is of this board. You know, we're really the voice of the community in many respects, and not only the park department, but also the council relies upon the feedback and input we provide, and so that's really the essence of why we're here. And I think attendance and sharing your thoughts is very important. And so, with that, I just kind of went back just to kind of take a look at the history of what we've been doing. And last year, for instance, our average was about 72% of the board was in attendance. This year, it's dropped down to 63%. And so I'm just trying to search for some reasoning. Is there some things that we need to do differently to improve that? Are there some things that are causing that? Is it just that everybody is just so darn busy? I don't know. I did notice, actually, since we moved things to this room, that's where some of it has actually dropped off, and so that might be a part of it. I don't know.
That coincides with when we've been televising.
Right.
So, I mean, that was one of our concerns.
Right.
When we talked about televising these meetings in the first place, was that
So
that might
be
impact
a
people's
contributor.
willingness to contribute or to run in, or if they were running late or
Right.
whatnot, so.
Any other thoughts that people might have in terms of how we can make sure that we have a pretty good amount of attendance? It's a tough subject. I just thought I'd bring it up because it is important, especially in these months moving forward. We have some recommendations to make, so I encourage you to participate as much as possible. And I also encourage you that if you miss something, or miss a meeting for a reason, to try and pick it up on YouTube or something, so that you really are up to speed when the time comes that we do make a recommendation. That's something that we didn't used to have access to, so that can be a beneficial tool. We're going to change tracking just a little bit. We've talked about where. So make sure if for some reason you can't attend, please make sure to send email to Melissa and or myself or both. Those would be considered as excused absences. People that don't send email, we're going to track those as just you're absent. Just help clarify to some extent in terms of the communication that we have on the board. So enough for that. I don't want to be a big downer. Just wanted to point that out that it's slipping a little bit. We need to try and make sure we're here as much as possible. We do have a tour that we want to try and do here over the summer, and thought I'd bring that up for discussion. We usually do it in, July, I'm thinking, or June. Anybody have any preference as to which of those months that we do? No preference, so.
I think it would depend on what the business items are. I mean, because normally that takes up the entire meeting.
Right.
And so if there are things that we should talk about or look at that are pressing, and especially with the timelines of, like, for example, the dog park, if you want to talk to us in June about that, then I would recommend that we do
July.
our tour in July.
Right.
It
So,
would be a month for master planning. We're hoping to have Methuen work with you, the park board,
Yeah.
in June, so
So July
July
would
would
be best,
work
okay.
better.
so that being said, July sounds good. Anybody have any recommendations of what you'd like to tour?
Well, it might be good to tour the dog park site, or, Tibbetts, if we're doing a master plan. Tibbetts in the dog park area, and maybe go over to veterans too. I don't think we've done either of those in the tours recently.
It's 2 years ago, but yeah,
Did
that's
we?
some thoughts that
Okay.
we've had is utilizing that time for locate all 3 of these sites, and even identifying a couple of spots along the corridor
Right.
as well.
It might be
Get
good
some
timing if
visuals.
Bethune's gonna be here in June too, to follow up with doing a little field work the next month. Okay, I think that's all good. And intentionally, August, we usually take off, and I think we're still gonna try for that unless there's something pressing. Do you have anything pressing that you know of where we wouldn't be able to?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
more
yeah,
on that
well,
later.
Let's sort of see how
Right,
things are
because that
coming
might
together,
come into,
but-
that might come into hard to take off, frankly, given where you're at with some planning issues. So we'll talk about that another time. Rules and regulations, we passed out, that's always good to have, we're at the beginning of our next term here, so it's always good to have a look-see here in terms of what we've all agreed to here about meeting and what this is all about. So it's a good time to kind of just take a brief look at that, especially for April, since you've not seen that yet. And that's all I had.
Right? Jacob?
Yeah, so the youth board, we're ending out our year. Usually June is the last month that we have active programming, and then July and August we take off. We start back mid-September. So really we're just ending up the year. We have the kids triathlon in early June. Actually, that's next Sunday. It's our 4th annual one. If you guys have any young kids who are in elementary to middle school age, be sure to check that out. So it's this Sunday. That's usually our biggest event of the year. So basically that's all hands on deck right now. That's our main project. In the past month, we were at the food bank for their annual Stamp Out the Hunger event, which is with the Postal Service, where they collect all the different food, all the different food from different places in Issaquah, and then bring it with the Postal Service to the food bank. So that was very successful. We had a huge group there, and the food bank is actually doing pretty well this year. They're looking to beat all of their goals for food, not just the amount, but the weight and the volume that's coming in. So it's pretty encouraging to see that. And then, yeah, we're also looking at new members, interviewing people as the year switches out. That's about it.
Thank you, Jacob.
And rounding out, I've got a couple of items to update on. You may have noticed over by the community center, the original or previous skate park demolition occurred earlier this month. They estimated 5 days, and it took 5 days. So no surprises in that project. The site is currently just an unimproved site. I think as we engage the community on the creek corridor, that Rainier Trail is really a key element of that corridor planning effort. So in terms of timing and getting some community engagement, public engagement about what may go there in the future, what some of the interests are, how do we look at that area in and around the community center, the pool. Now that we have the partnership with the garage, really seeing that as a recreational corridor and really a hub. One of the pearls along this necklace of the corridor. It'll be, I think, valuable to get some community feedback on what element or elements they'd like to see there along the trail. Another item related to our senior center. You may be aware of the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services levy that was passed by King County 2 years ago. As part of that levy, there was some specific funding identified for senior centers and supporting senior centers. We were successful last year in getting a 1-year grant. King County then took the remaining 5 years of that 6-year levy, and they put out a call for applications for 5 years of operational funding that starts next year. took some work in terms of identifying how the county sort of framed that application together. Once they did, they encouraged cities to not only apply, but to partner in how we apply. And so Courtney Garcia, who's our senior center supervisor, just did an outstanding job of really overseeing that work. And as we really brainstormed how we'd submit an application, we did submit an application. We've partnered with two senior centers to the east of us, in both North Bend and Snoqualmie, and put together a joint application that we think is going to be really, really strong, and just another way of helping to get some funding and some resources that will help us meet our goals for operation of the senior center. So more to come as we start to get, or as we get news of how we'll do in that. We should be hearing likely July timeframe from the county as to how we ranked. Another item that's been underway and we've been at work at is this is the 2-year interval of updating the city's 6-year capital improvement plan, 6-year CIP. So we've been hard at work at updating that CIP. The good news with that update, and you may recall this as we went through the Park Strategic Plan process, is we really wanted to set a sequence that Park Strategic Plan, that 20-year vision, really becomes the cornerstone and really informs the 6-year CIP. So we have been putting together our 6-year CIP that will be going to City Council for a couple of sessions here in June. June 10th, that'll be introduced, and then June 24th, there'll be further council conversation. As that CIP gets finalized, I just wanted to make sure you heard or were aware that not only is the Park Strategic Plan really the foundation of that 6-year plan that we're doing, if you remember, we prioritized projects, the strategic projects in the plan, into near-term, mid-term, and long-term buckets. How that's really going to be helpful for us is the near-term recommended projects. That, in essence, becomes the 6-year CIP for parks that we are submitting, and will be part of that conversation and communication with council. So we'll certainly keep you informed as those conversations unfold, but again, just appreciative of the work we did on that Park Strategic Plan, and really setting a game plan for how these planning efforts inform, and when done in sequence, really build upon one another, and help us with our goals. Last item is, I should probably end on a more positive note, but just I think a piece to communicate to you, but also the community. We, as the summer season is upon us, the spring season means growing season. This has been an exceptional year for us in terms of, on the park operations, park maintenance side, in terms of recruiting. We have had a heavy reliance the last really 15 or 20 years. We've had a high reliance on part-time staff, on hiring seasonal staff. And we've seen in prior years some increased difficulties in recruitment. This year has really been a hard year for finding staff. At this point in time in the year, we would like to have 8 to 10 part-time staff on board. I think we're now at 3 or 4. So that has, the outcome of that has really created some portions of our park system that we're not real proud of either, in terms of the level of maintenance that they're at. And we are continue to recruit. We have some additional staff that are coming on board. We've been working with Matt Meckler and Rick and the park operations team in adjusting and getting some of our contracted work on board. Additionally, we have a budgeted full-time position that was added to the 2019 budget that we were just given the green light to proceed with recruitment. So not saying this as Eeyore, saying, oh, woe is us, but really just the condition of some of our parks and right-of-way are not only not acceptable to the community, but not acceptable to us either. So we continue to both address this year's problem and then really looking ahead, something we're really having some strategic conversations with and have started with administration and with the department is how do we look at that reliance that we've had on part-time staff and look at ways to either mitigate or address moving forward how we are resourced in a way that decreases the vulnerability that I think we're seeing and have been seeing, but could very well be seeing well into the future. So more to come.
So we need a higher unemployment rate, is that what you're telling us?
I don't want to put that out there. I think it's, how are we proportionately looking at full-time workforce, part-time workforce? We're always going to have a reliance. We're a seasonal business, so how do we look at the proportionality of those? And how do we look at contracted work? How do we look at, as we're launching Green Issaquah, how do we look at increasing our volunteer muscle and getting a lot more strategic in our capacity with getting some volunteer work done as well. So lots of, no one single answer, and no, I'm not wishing higher unemployment on anyone. I know you were joking.
I was trying to lighten it a little bit.
Okay.
I have a question. Jacob, are you graduating this year?
Yes, and I will be looking for a replacement. I will be here for definitely the next couple meetings. I'm not
Oh, you
sure.
will? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure about, like, obviously not August,
Right.
September.
But you'll be here in June?
Yeah, I'll be here in
Okay,
June. I'm
great.
pretty sure July as well.
Okay.
And your replacement won't be appointed until September, probably?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so, well, I think you have done a great job during your term, and I really appreciate both you keeping us updated in great detail and then also participating and giving us feedback like during these meetings. So you've done a great job. So glad you'll be back next month, but good luck next year.
Anything else? Any new business discussion? If not, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for adding that about Jacob.